Divorce Network, and you're listening to Dating and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedacca. And as always, we talk about issues that are relevant to parents before, during, and long after divorce to help them make the best decisions about themselves and their children and to give them the best advice. And I always have wonderful guests that I'm very proud to introduce you to. And today is no different. So I want to welcome John Berrens to our show. And John Berrens is a PhD level school psychologist, and he spent the majority of his career in middle school counseling, where he developed an interest in working with students from divorced, separated, or single parent families in both groups and individually. And he recently published a book titled My Name Is, a collection of short stories inspired by teens from these settings. So welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be talking to you. And, I could say you've been in the trenches because teaching middle school is definitely one of the most demanding arenas possible in the educational world. My former husband, before divorce, was a middle school teacher. And so I know a lot about the stress and the challenges, and I have great respect for you for doing that. And I'm particularly interested in talking about those young teens, middle school teens, and their situations and how they are impacted by pre-divorce, divorce, post-divorce, co-parenting, and all of those related topics. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, right?
Certainly, yes.
So why don't you just start by giving us a little bit about your background working in the schools?
Yeah, well, I started as a school psychologist, and I worked for 10 years doing mostly school psychology stuff. I tried to work some with groups of kids, but the job was spent an awful lot in school psychology, doing evaluations and meetings and all those kinds of things. So I took the transfer into the guidance department about 10 years into it. I worked a total of 40 years. And, then I had the time to do things I really thought I was having a greater impact with youngsters. And it was running one of the things which, you look back at your career and you think of a handful of things which you thought you did pretty well. And one of them was working with these youngsters who came from divorced, separated, or single parent families. I learned a lot in those first couple years of running those types of groups. I had had some training when I was doing strictly the school psych stuff from an organization in Cincinnati called Beach Acres. They were actually running a training for free for people that were interested in facilitating groups for kids who came from divorced or separated families. So I took it. And as I said, those first 10 years, I didn't get a whole lot of opportunity to run as many groups as I wanted to, but I did a few. And then by the time I ran into the guidance office, I had plenty of time to do those kinds of things. So I picked up and started doing it, and I learned as much from the kids those first couple of years, I think, as they learned from me. Because
Imagine.
it was a bit of an eye-opening experience at times. So that's kind of where we all got started. I just did it ran groups every year from then on out. Early on, I had a few times at the high school where I ran a few groups because I was helping some people at the high school with some things, but most of it was with middle school age kids. Well, initially it was our schools were junior highs, which were 7, 8, and 9, and then we changed over to middle schools, which were 6, 7, and 8. So that's where the majority of my time was spent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So can you share a bit about the things that you found that students had in common, the students who were coping with issues about come from families where there was a divorce, co-parenting, post-divorce, new relationships in the family dynamic. I mean, all of those things come to
All
play
those things come into play.
for people who are for kids who are exposed to this particular situation. And what do they have in common, and what were some of the challenges that they in particular were facing that the other students weren't?
Well, I think one of the things was that it hit them differently when they got to middle school age. I found that a lot of the kids who I had in my groups, a lot of them, the divorce had occurred when they were in younger grades. And some of them even before they even occurred, before they even entered school. And it was like when they hit this middle school age, the whole thing just kind of exploded on many of them. Things might have been going pretty good when they were younger. They coped a little bit better. Then they get to middle school, and I think all those kinds of things which kick in when you're in middle school. You start beginning to notice people of the opposite gender. You start to wonder what's going on if mom or dad maybe you're starting to date somebody now. Why is that kind of thing occurring? Why has dad only been dating this lady or mom this guy for 6 months, and suddenly they're talking about moving in already? Those things play with a middle school mind, I think, a lot more than they do somebody who's in first or second grade. The first and second grader is much more likely just to kind of accept that, where the middle schooler starts to question, why is this person moving in so quick? Or and even you run into the issues, which a lot of them talked about when their parents had either remarried or were dating someone. Um, why does this new person think they can tell me what to do? They're not my mom, they're not my dad. Why are they telling me to clean up my room or to get off the couch or whatever the case may be? That was a real common thing, and you don't see. I don't think you saw quite as much of that with the younger kids, and part of that is just because the middle school age kids start to rebel a little bit more. They become a little bit more independent, so they start seeing some of those things and start questioning some of those things a whole lot more than the younger ones did. So,
Well, that's fascinating and right on target from the same experiences that
oh
I've
yeah.
seen in families.
Hmm.
So older teens respond differently in many ways, and I'd like to see if you can share some of the differences with the younger teens versus the older teens in high school, and what they're picking up on.
Well, I think one of the things, and again, I don't have a whole lot of experience with the older kids, but the older kids can be more independent. They cannot be around and avoid. They can just avoid stuff. They can get a part-time job and be out of the house. They can play on the athletic team. They can be on the drill team. They can just find ways to get away from it all. And that's an easier way. It's an easier way to cope if you don't have to experience it as often. I mean, even not kids who are in divorce situations. There were many kids I said, hang in there another year or two until you get to high school. It's going to be a little easier. You can get out of the house a whole lot more. So that's one thing that's a little bit different with the older kids. The other thing is, even with the younger kids, and again, this varies from state to state down, is, when the youngster has the right to say, I don't want to go see dad or mom this weekend, or I would prefer to live with this parent or that parent. And I know that varies from state to state. When they get to high school, they're usually at that point where that's not so much an issue anymore. They can say, I want to live with dad or I want to live with mom, and that occurs. 11 or 12-year-old, depending on where you're living, that may not be taken into consideration. So that's another factor which occurs. The whole dating things, again, the older kids are kind of getting into that, and they're kind of understanding it a little bit better than the 12 or 13 or 14-year-old is. They're just kind of just, and some, a lot of 11, 12-year-olds, they don't think about girls or boys. That's just not part of their world yet. Some of them it is, but that's very different, again, comparing the younger kids with the older kids. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm curious as to what interactions did you have with all of their parents? Did you have any kinds of groups or any ways that you could talk specifically to parents of these kids, or was it just the occasional parent conference when you had a really troubled child to deal with?
Yeah, the parents, for the most part, I really didn't speak to. You get your permission for them to be in the groups. And occasionally you would get a parent to call you up. And that was usually after the group was over, maybe the following school year or near the end of the school year. And I mean, I've had many a parent. I'm really sold. Let me back up. I'm really sold on the group process with kids versus seeing. And I'm not beating up on people that see kids individually at all, because I saw plenty of kids individually, but I always had much more success when we were in the group.
Yeah.
And I had many a parent over the many years call me or tell me, I had little Susie and seeing this therapist for 6 months, and we never really got anywhere. Things just always stayed the same. But then they got in with the group of kids and it changed. And I'm convinced, I always referred to it as the power of the group. There's something about seeing another person across the room from you who is kind of going through some of the same types of things you are. I kidded sometimes about the fact that, the old saying, misery loves company. And I always talked about how when we first started a group, sometimes the first 2, 3 sessions, depending on the size of the group, was a lot of moaning and complaining and griping, and that they had to kind of get it all out first before you could start to work on, okay, how do we cope with this? How do we deal with this? How do we handle this type of situation? But that those first couple weeks of kids just laying it on the table, shall we say, um, is what started the cohesion between the groups. Because, oh my gosh, you got it worse than I do, or oh, you had the same kind of thing with your stepmom that I had with my stepdad. So they see some similarities, and I think that is what happens with the power of the group. And the other thing I loved about running groups was as the group progressed over the course of a school year, and I would usually start these things up around the end of September to beginning of October, and we'd run them twice a month all the way through the end of the school year. So we'd have somewhere between 17 and 19 meetings throughout the course of the year. And one of the things I found that as the group progressed was that I talked less and they talked more. They started giving each other advice and tips. You know, when this happened at my family, I tried this, or this is how I handled this situation. And that became more and more common. I think it empowered kids. It empowered them to be willing to share stuff with other kids. And it empowered them to try things out, some of their friends' suggestions out. And so I thought that was just really, really neat. I love sitting back watching that happen. Yeah.
It's such a wonderful concept, simple and yet so profoundly effective because
Mhm.
everything you're talking about makes so much sense. Kids feeling supported, feeling
Yeah.
they're not alone in the universe with these problems that they can't figure out, knowing other people have them, being able to be empathic towards other kids
Mhm.
or helpful and share with one another. All of that is a huge plus. Was were your groups school oriented, where they were out of the school, or were they just out of you and your department?
No, I was located in the school, and depending on what building I was working at, some of them were really easy to run, and some of them were more difficult just in terms of working them out with the teachers. I mean, the for example, one of the middle schools where was in for a lot of years, the principal said take them out of. We had something we called encore classes, and the other schools call them specials, like your music, art, gym,
Mhm.
foreign language, and he just said take them out of those classes. I was doing it twice a month, and we rotated. They had 2 classes of that a day. One month we take, or the first meeting in a month, I might take them out of art, and the second meeting in a month, I might take them out of
So
fitness education. And that people were pretty agreeable with that. And yeah, yeah, I will say that in 40 years, I didn't run into a few teachers that didn't like that setup, but the vast majority of them were extremely supportive. And the parents were too. They didn't care if the kid missed. They would rather them be with where they were getting some assistance, maybe rather than kicking the volleyball or kicking the kickball
right.
around in fitness education class.
Did you have any contact with the parents afterwards, summarizing what we
No, never
accomplished?
did.
Or
Never did. They didn't request it, and I just never did
wow,
that because and part of the reason was I didn't want them to think that they could come to me and what did my kids say in group? What did they say about me? What did they think about me? What did they think about my new wife or my girlfriend? Or what did they think
I
about the fact that we
see.
had to change houses? I didn't want to be put in that situation of saying that's private. That's between. And as I told the kids, the first time we ever met, we always came up with rules for the group. And one of the biggest rule of the group was confidentiality. And as I also told the kids at the beginning of the group, there are 2 times I need to break confidentiality. And that is if I feel that you're a danger to yourself or you're a danger to somebody else, then I break confidentiality. If I feel that you might be going home and hurting yourself tonight, you betcha I'm going to get on the phone to your mom and dad and other people too. But other than that, I don't go tell mom and dad what you're feeling or what you express. So for me, I didn't want those meetings with parents afterwards. I didn't want to have some parents, you know, maybe trying to get a little forceful to get out of me whatever their youngster said in the group. Yeah.
So my question now is, we have parents listening,
Yeah, sure.
and so I'd love you to share some of the insights that you absorbed and realized after all these years of working
Mhm.
with kids. What insights and lessons and teachings do you want to share with the parents?
Well, I think the biggest is talk less and listen more.
Hmm.
I think, too often, and I think it happens more with middle school age kids because middle school age kids are gonna push the boundaries anyways. That's just, if they're not pushing the boundaries, they're not being middle school age kids. And so they do push the boundaries. And there's a tendency, I think, I mean, I did it sometimes when I was a parent. I wanted to tell them what to do and tell them how to act and, quit doing this or start doing that. And, sometimes you got to sit back and let them make some of their own mistakes. You can't do everything for them, and you got to listen to how they feel. One of the things which, and I also ran in the schools. I ran just parenting classes, not too often throughout my career, but I did do a number of them. And one of the things I tried to teach parents was, in terms of this listening thing and talking less, was quit asking questions and make statements instead. You can, instead of saying, how was your day at school today? When they come in, if they look like they had a lousy day at school, say, not a great day at school. And make it, the tone of your voice makes it a question or a statement, and a couple of words make it a question or a statement. Don't always expect them to answer you.
Yes.
Just float by, oh, gee, bad soccer game today, or whatever the case may be, or, you weren't happy tonight when we went out to such and such a place. That's different than, were you happy tonight when we went out? It's because when you ask a question to anybody, somebody asks me a question, asks you a question, you kind of put them in a corner to come up with an answer. And pushing teenagers into a corner, I think sometimes thickens the wall between you and them. And not only for that conversation, but for conversations down the road. So by just plain listening more, making more statements rather than asking so many questions, don't be surprised if they don't answer you even when you make statements. Because again, that's part of I hate to say the nature of the middle school beast, but it sort of is. I mean, how many parents, and you've maybe experienced this with your own kids growing up, how was your day? Good. The universal word, good. And parents get frustrated with that. Well, then quit asking the question if you want a different answer. Don't ask a question at all. Just make an observation. Because one of the things I learned with kids, and then, I'm sure you've seen this working with kids too. If you get it wrong when you make an observation, an awful lot of the times they'll tell you got it wrong.
Yes.
If you tell them, hey, you don't look very happy today, which is a statement. And if that's not the case, they might tell you, no, I'm fine today. I'm fine. I'm just really tired today. Oh, okay. Well, that's different than having a bad day. You're just tired. So kids will frequently correct you if you make a wrong statement, or if you just misjudge what you think they're feeling. But then just listen to them. That is my top piece of advice. If there were other couple pieces of advice I would throw at parents, when a split up has occurred, and I had numerous kids talk to me about this over the years, is sometimes I just feel like I'm caught in the middle. That is such a common. I had one kid years ago, and I've used this example because his kid brought it up. He said, I feel like I'm the rope in a game of tug of war.
Wow.
I got a parent on each arm pulling. And I brought that up numerous, and it happened pretty early in my career that a kid brought that up. And I've used that example with kids in groups numerous times. And oh my gosh, the heads nod all the time. And they're saying, yep, that's exactly what it is. Mom wants me to do this. Dad wants me to do that. And they say, sometimes it just drives me crazy. I just want to scream at both of them and say, would you just ask me what I want sometimes? And part of that being caught in the middle is one or both of the parents that want the youngsters to be the messenger person.
Yes.
Tell your mom this, tell your dad that. And that's not fair. And puts kids under undue stress. And you want them to get mad at you. If you want to, start asking them to be your mailman. Don't it's your relationship with your former spouse. If you have to communicate with them, figure out a way for you to communicate them without putting your youngster in the middle, being either the telephone messenger or the mailman or whatever. Or tell your dad he showed up late today, or tell your mom why she send you home with this. You tell the mom, you tell the dad. That's the parent's job. Don't put your kid in that middle situation. It's tough.
It's always surprising at how obvious that seems to
Yeah.
us, and yet it isn't obvious to so many parents. It's just such a natural thing to understand how kids would feel being caught in the middle, being torn on both
Oh
sides,
yeah.
having an allegiance to both parents and
Yeah.
feeling guilty if they do too
Oh
much
yeah.
or too much there, or feeling guilty to say, hey, I want to talk to mom if I'm at dad's house, vice
Mhm,
versa,
mhm.
feeling guilty if they say something positive about the parent that the other they know the other parent really dislikes and disrespects. All of those things are horrendous emotionally and psychologically for children.
Agreed. Definitely.
And
Most
I
definitely.
just don't understand. I guess parents are just so caught up in their own drama that they have closed the door to seeing and understanding. They're just caught up in their own situation, and they're oblivious to what it's like for kids. And that's what made me so passionate about starting the Child-Centered Divorce Network and becoming a divorce and co-parenting coach, because I needed to shake both
Hmm.
parents and
Sometimes you do.
say yes, and say there are other ways of doing this, or there are better alternatives, and let's think of how your kids are going to be impacted by these decisions. Once they stop and do, very often they will make wiser decisions and
Right.
understand it more, but they definitely need to a shaking from time to time.
Sometimes. And when another thing I think sometimes happens, even more so with boys than girls, and I'll tell you that when I ran these groups, 80% of the participants were girls. It was always hard to get guys to join up.
Right.
But one of the things I think which happens even a little bit more with guys than girls is guys try to be cool.
Yeah.
They kind of, well, I can handle this. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And
Yeah.
instead of, whereas girls might cry, they might get mad, they might scream a little bit more than their male counterparts. Guys tend to kind of keep it in and internalize it a whole lot more than the young ladies of the same age.
That's
And
for
I think
sure.
that's not always the healthiest thing either. But we as a society, that's kind of the role guys play a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it,
Unfortunately, that's the truth in our system. And it's good that they had you as a male role model there, running those groups, especially for the boys who it's just harder for them to jump in and be able to share in those kinds of situations, dealing with heavy emotions.
Right, and because the guys often act like everything's okay, I think sometimes the parents then believe everything's okay, and they don't realize that there might be a storm brewing that they're even unaware of, and then, every once in a while, you might get that blow up with the youngster, and they're like, "What's going on? How did this happen?
And
We thought
yeah,
everything
where
was
did this
great.
come from?
I thought you liked my boyfriend," and then you find out he hated the girl that
Yeah.
that mom's been redating or something. It's just been sitting and maybe going on for a long, long period of time. And
Yeah.
because guys just kind of, they keep it more under wraps.
So
I think
true.
that's a tough
So
situation.
I want to ask you, you've written a book. It has an interesting name. Can you tell us about it and why you wrote it?
Okay. Well, I wrote the book. I'll show you the title. I'll show you the cover of the book. The book's like that. Um, it's called My Name Is. And what it is it's 7 short stories. They're all teenagers telling in a flashback fashion what they went through in their particular family situation.
Mhm.
Um, the reason I wrote it, there's really several reasons I wrote it. One is that I knew when I was in a school, and let me give you the example, the one middle school I spent 10 years at. We had a little over anywhere between 210 and 220 kids per grade level. So I knew that I was only seeing a very small portion of those kids. So whether individually or in groups. So okay, is there another outlet for the kids? It's a place like this book. The second reason I wrote the book, big reason, was that when we ended these groups, the kids always told me the same thing. In May when we did our last session, I'd say, "Okay, let's talk about the group. What'd you like? What didn't you like? What did you get out of it? What did you?" And the kids always told me the same kind of things. I was so alone before I was in this group. I never realized other kids went through this kind of stuff before I was in this group. Nobody ever cared what I thought or what I was feeling when my parents were splitting up, and so on and so forth. So again, another reason for the book is to give other kids who never talk to anybody, and really I think most kids don't, um, give them another source to see, there's some other kids that went through some of the same things and maybe some worse things than I did. And also you can learn a little bit from the book. I mean, there's not a there's some suggested strategies in that in the afterword, but you might see how the characters in the book coped with their particular situation or didn't cope. Because, if you look at the 7 stories, um, some of them you read and you think, this kid will probably turn out okay. And there's a couple of them you read and you kind of scratch your head and you think, yeah, this kid doesn't have it's not a great outcome. It's likely. So, I got the book out there. It's slowly starting to pick up in sales. I get good reviews, and I don't know if you've ever written a book or not, but the hassle is getting it out there. That is the problem. And hopefully, things like this conversation we're having today may even help some families find it, and maybe it'll help their youngsters or moms and dads. Because one of the things mom and dads have told me who have read it is, I didn't know that kids were thinking or feeling these ways.
Yeah. And that's such a pivotal point. I wish
Yeah,
we had more time to go in
yeah,
depth.
this
But
was great, though.
we've reached our time
I
limit.
see.
And I wanted to thank you, John Berrens. You've done a wonderful job in giving us so many things to think about
Thank
parenting teens. And it's been a wonderful conversation.
I've
Um,
enjoyed it.
Thank you. And
Well,
thank
thank
you
you.
for my guest.
Okay.
I wanted to thank everyone for listening. This is WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network, and this is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedacca. And as you know, I'm a divorce and co-parenting coach at the Child-Centered Divorce Network, and you could find out more about my coaching, books, courses, and programs at childcentereddivorce.com. So I hope you'll visit me there, and I hope you'll visit me again on the podcast. Thank you so much, and
Thank
we'll
you
see
for
you
having me.
again. We'll see everyone again next time.